Well, good evening. I call the regular meeting of the Ames City Council for Tuesday, April 11th to order. And we're going to start the meeting off with a couple of proclamations, followed by a award presentation. Hey, Dylan. Economic Development Week. Whereas economic development professionals are engaged in a wide variety of settings, including rural and urban, local, state, and federal governments, public-private partnerships, chambers of commerce, and universities, helping to create and expand jobs that facilitate growth in these regions. And whereas the creation of new opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs is one of the key components to securing the economic future of City of Ames for generations to come. And whereas Ames is committed to fostering a business-friendly climate that will attract and retain employers, enable the community to grow and remain competitive on a global scale, and generate new jobs and opportunities for our citizens. And whereas the Ames Economic Development Commission is committed to providing quality resources that boost economic growth and enhance quality of life throughout Ames and Story County. Therefore, I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim May 8th through May 12th, 2023 as Economic Development Week in appreciation for all of our partners in the economic development field who make the City of Ames the vibrant and thriving community it is today. And I'd invite Dylan Klein from the AEDC and Chamber to offer a few words.
Thank you. I was having a conversation with a colleague this week and asked the rhetorical question of what is economic development, and it's everything. It's the park that the city is building across the street. It's the planting of a tree on a boulevard. Of course, it's the attraction of an industry to our community to create high quality jobs. But it's the building of a house or the creating of an apartment building for people to raise their family. So economic development is everything. And so the Ames Economic Development Commission, and particularly myself, is just really honored to be partnered with the City of Ames, with the people of Ames, and just all of the support that we have of our great industries to do everything, economic development. So thank you very much.
All right, and invite Beth to come up here. Beth, I honestly would probably not do your last name justice, so I apologize. But we're going to read a proclamation on Fair Housing Month. Whereas April is Fair Housing Month, a time when we celebrate the Fair Housing Act and recommit ourselves to ensuring every American has access to housing that is free from discrimination. The Fair Housing Act makes it unlawful to discriminate in housing transactions based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, or family status. This year, HUD is especially focused on protecting the rights of individuals to feel safe and secure in their homes, free from sexual harassment or unwanted sexual advances. And whereas this year's Fair Housing Month theme, Choices for All Voices, Building an Equitable Future, reflects the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to advancing equity in housing and the importance of increasing public awareness of everyone's right to fair housing. And whereas the City of Ames additionally prohibits discrimination in the areas of housing, education, employment, public accommodations or services, credit, sexual orientation, developmental disability, physical disability, gender, and gender identity. And whereas only with the cooperation, commitment, and support from HUD, the city, the Ames Human Relations Commission, the Central Iowa Board of Realtors, area housing providers, and all the residents of Ames and Story County, can barriers to the enjoyment of this and other aspects of equality of opportunity for all be removed. Therefore, I, John A. Hala, Mayor of the City of Ames, Iowa, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2023 as Fair Housing Month and establish Ames Story County as an inclusive community committed to fair housing and encourage all citizens of our community to support and endorse fair housing, reaffirm their commitment to fair housing for all, and wholeheartedly recognize those rights and responsibilities throughout the year. And I invite Vanessa and Beth to share a few words. Apparently, Beth does not want to share any words, but I'll let Vanessa do that.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for always supporting Fair Housing Month, which is really important to our community. And Beth and I, along with the other city staff, want to challenge you to participate in I Support Fair Housing. We have a big poster downstairs that you can do a selfie and send it in once a week for prizes. So you just help us to say, I stand and I support fair housing. So we're asking everyone in the city of Ames to participate in our challenge and help us to continue to keep fair housing and discrimination in our community and out of our community. So thank you.
I am proud to be here on behalf of the Central Iowa Board of Realtors. We are nearly 300 strong, and we also support fair housing. And our realtors go through a lot of training every April for Fair Housing Month. And this month we are doing the same, and we are incorporating some of our lender professionals into a lender forum that we are hosting to expand fair housing and get education on fair housing for all to improve the accommodations for everyone. So thank you very much.
All right. It's my honor to invite the Ames Human Relations Commission to come up, those who are present, and make this exciting award tonight.
I want you to know I had a 30-minute speech, but I cut it down just for you.
So I would cut you off after two.
You know, I've got both of them up here in case one doesn't work. First of all, to the mayor and members of the city council, I bring you greetings from the Ames Human Relations Commission. I am honored to present to you the 2023 recipient of the Ames Human Relations Commission, a Home for Everyone Award. This year, we received 4 worthy nominees for this award. From these nominees, Lori Allen was selected for this year's award. Lori Allen is the Director of Good Neighbors Emergency Assistance. In this nomination, Lori was described as someone who works tirelessly to ensure that our most vulnerable neighbors have housing. Lori and Good Neighbors provide rent and utility assistance to eligible Story County households. Lori works diligently to fundraise for her organization to help an average of about 50 households a month through the emergency rent and utility program. Lori works to ensure that all households are connected with additional resources and support to promote the household's financial stability long-term. This is just a small sample of what Lori's work is all about. So in closing, it was stated, Lori Allen is a worthy recipient of the Ames Human Relations Commission, a Home for Everyone Award, as she strives for exactly that. She recognizes stable housing as a human right and works enthusiastically towards that end. So please join me to congratulate Lori Allen for her outstanding work. Here's a member of the commission with me. You want to say anything?
Sure, 2 words. I'll say 2 words very quickly. Well, I would just like to thank Annika Mundell from the United Way, who I understand nominated me for this award. And also, some of my board members from Good Neighbor are here, as well as some of my family and my coworker. And without any of these people, I wouldn't be as aware as I am of what needs are and what can be done to remedy these things. So thank you to the mayor and the city council and the Human Relations Committee for doing such great work for making sure that there is a home for everyone here in Ames, Iowa. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, all right. Go ahead. I bet.
Well, good evening, Council. I want to take this opportunity to introduce to you Cassandra Ames. Cassandra is our new DEI coordinator, and she has been with us now for almost 2 weeks. She started on March 29th, and so we thought this would be a great opportunity to introduce her to Council as well as members here of the public, and I'll turn it over to Cassandra to tell a little bit about herself.
Good evening. My name is Cassandra Ames, and just a little bit about myself. So I was born in Mexico, in Guadalajara. Most of my family's still there. When I was 3, we moved to Pullman, Washington. My dad had a scholarship to get his PhD done there. So at the end of those 4 years, we moved back to Mexico, to a different city. We were there for a year, and then from there we moved to the Netherlands for 3 years. Then we moved back to Mexico, to a city closer to Mexico City. Lived there for a year. Then I moved again within Mexico to a different city called Irapuato. Lived there for 5 years. And then right when I was about to start junior year in high school, we moved to Fargo, North Dakota. My dad was working for Pioneer, and the project was in Sunflower, so that took us to Fargo. And I finished high school there, started at NDSU. I did my freshman and my sophomore year there. And my dad was going back and forth from Fargo, Moorhead to Johnston. So they just moved to Urbandale, and they started working and living here full time. So then as they went up and they visited me, I had school, job, an apartment. And I now jokingly say that my parents were ahead of their time because of what I'm about to say. But in one of those visits, they came up and they brought a pamphlet of Iowa State University campus, and they said, "Don't you want to transfer here? There's so much more diversity. Look at all the opportunities there are here." And by that time, I was like, well, it's about time to move again. So I transferred to Iowa State. Before I graduated, actually, within the year, they then came back and they're like, well, I just got a job in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So we're going to go, but we'll be back for your graduation. So since then, I have graduated from Iowa State with sociology and have just had really great opportunities for growth. I worked at Mid-Iowa Community Action, YSS, the Octagon. I was a detention officer at the Story County Jail. From there, I went to the Story County Attorney's Office as a legal assistant, and I decided I need to go back to school. So I got my master's degree in organizational leadership, which I graduated with just this last July. And through that, I have discovered formally the world of DEI, started attending the Symposium on Building Inclusive Organizations in 2020. And from there, really started digging a little bit more, started networking and asking organizations and people within the community what the plan was, what their vision was for DEI here in Ames and Story County. And that's when I decided I wanted to do my capstone research project in DEI within Story County. So then I feel like that and the experiences that just kind of make up who I am really led me here. And luckily, Ames was looking for a position, so I didn't have to move. So here I am, very happy to be here and starting such an exciting role with the city of Ames. So thank you.
Thank you. 2 minutes. 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 2 minutes.
And I will note too, since we've got a couple of Human Relation Commission members in the room, Cassandra is going to become the staff liaison for the commission. So we're making that transition over the next few months, and she got to sit in on the first meeting, her first day. So very pleased to have her aboard, and I'm sure you'll be running into her quite often. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, we'll move on to consent agenda. Is there any item that the council desires to pull tonight? Hearing none, entertain a motion approving consent.
Move consent.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I'll transition into public forum. This is a time we set aside for comments from the public on topics of city business other than those listed on the agenda. And we would ask people to limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. Is there anyone that wants to address city council under public forum tonight? Seeing none, we'll close public forum and we'll move on to item number 23, Ames Urban Fringe Plan Update and 28E Extension.
Good evening, City Council. Tonight, we're discussing the Ames Urban Fringe Plan update. It's a process that we've been involved with Story County and the City of Gilbert for just over a year now. We had gone through a draft plan process last spring and early summer. I recounted in the staff report that we've discussed this a number of times. I'm not going to go into all of the details about the plan, but we have had substantial public comment last May and June. Revisions to the plan were suggested by City of Gilbert and Story County in the fall, and we've been working through back and forth with the city and our other cooperators, different concepts for how to move forward on an update to the plan. Our current plan was drafted in around 2006. We entered into a 2080 agreement with Gilbert and with Story County for its joint administration in 2011. That agreement, called a 2080, is set to expire at the end of the month. We have been continuing to extend that agreement for joint administration of that older plan while we've been working on the update. So tonight, what has been put before you is a request from the Board of Supervisors to consider some additional changes from the last version that you looked at in January. The City of Gilbert has also had a comment letter as well. I'll focus mostly on the Story County one. I think ultimately the Story County letter addresses the essential elements of the Gilbert letter as well with their quarter-mile distance proposal. And then the second part of that is whether or not the 2080 should be extended as the Board of Supervisors requests. They've approved an extension to the end of June, and I believe the City of Gilbert has also approved an extension till the end of June. So for tonight, what I'm going to focus on is really the 2 land use map changes and some of the other policies the Board of Supervisors have asked for us to consider. If you have other questions about the plan in its entirety, I'm happy to ask those. I'm really just focusing in again on what the changes are from sequentially over time to where we are today. So in January, we focused on 2 geographies around Ames. The first was to the north, and we'll talk that through first. So the plan has a couple of basic concepts. We have areas that are set aside as ag and farm services, where really no divisions, no development, no activities would really occur that the city would really be involved in. So we'd be delegating all of our authority to the county, and really nothing would change in those areas. And then we have rural residential areas existing and planned, where for the most part, that would be Story County jurisdiction. And then we had the blue areas, which you see up here. So green, the light green was ag and farm service. Yellows were the rural residential. The dark blues represent areas that were considered urban growth or growth areas that cities might expand into during the life of the plan. Our growth areas are based on Ames Plan 2040. So you adopted that plan about 15 months ago. We included policies for the fringe area as part of that, identified a lot of policies about how growth should occur and how the city would sequence that. And that was embedded in this plan. And then the next layer is an overlay. So where you see the hatching, the cross hatching, that's an area that's a new designation that's not in the old fringe plan called an urban reserve overlay. And the intent of that is twofold from the city of Ames perspective. One, it signals that it is an area that the city would possibly consider annexing into. It's not a growth area with immediate opportunity, but it is something that the long-term evolution of the city might look to grow into. And the way Plan 2040 is written, we have a lot of area to manage for growth. We're trying to be flexible on that and then also be responsive over time that if desirability is high in one part of the city, we could move in that direction if that's really where the market's at versus having to reinvent our whole plan. So urban reserve helps us guide future decisions. Now, the other benefit to the city from a fringe plan perspective was we had asked to help manage compatibility in this area with Story County, and that Story County would consider limiting conditional uses in these areas. So effectively, it's ag and farm services underneath them for the most part. So you would still be ag and farm uses. You can't divide into rural subdivisions, but we would look for Story County to also limit certain conditional uses that may not be compatible with housing. So like a windmill is a very obvious example, not a great neighbor if you're looking to expand into a growth area. So for the city, those hatched areas were pretty important for both signaling possible growth and then to manage compatibility in the long run. So we have urban reserve kind of encircling the city for the most part. So to the north, just to get back to the specifics of this area, we had proposed to show, consistent with Plan 2040, 1 mile north of the city, essentially extending almost from Iowa Creek east past Highway 69 as urban reserve, just to hold that area for potential for the city. So we first responded in November. You can see that red outline saying, at the request of the county, can you reduce the amount of area in urban reserve? So we agreed in November to cut the area from GW Carver, 190th Street out of the plan, but we wanted to retain the area to the east of the railroad tracks, north of 190th Street. That was more in the heart of an area that we believe we could serve. So in response to that, again, Gilbert and Story County had asked for us to reduce that area. Gilbert looking for a buffer between the two cities. You can see the current boundaries of the cities now. Gilbert's about a quarter mile from 180th, and then we're up to 190th. So currently there's about a 1.25 mile distance between the two towns. We proposed in response to that to scope the urban reserve down again, leave a permanent 1/4 mile buffer. If Gilbert wanted to leave a buffer on the north side of 180th, that's fine for them. But as the city, we were looking for a 3/4 mile area. And that proposal is really based on trying to look at, from our perspective, how would development really work? How much land to really substantially invest in infrastructure do you need? Could you do it on a 1/4 mile, a half, or 3/4? So kind of looking at land ownership patterns, just kind of thinking through how our land use scenarios were done 3 years ago. Staff recommended that 3/4 mile could really accomplish most of our goals, really fit that really long-term intent for the city. So that was our proposal to the north. What the county has proposed back, and I believe Gilbert supports, is to have a 1/4 mile overlay. So now you can see this proposal in the Story County letter shows that hatching 1/4 mile north of 190th Street. And the remaining area goes back to being ag and farm services. So our comment from staff is we don't really have a position different than the January position on this issue. If you're really looking at what's desirable from a planning perspective, how do you provide services, what do you need in terms of an order of magnitude of growth to really want to spend time working on that concept, we thought more than a 1/4 mile was necessary, and we haven't really changed our position on that. So if the city council is interested in adjusting the fringe plan policies to reflect what the Board of Supervisors has proposed or something else, or has questions for me about how could you adapt to that, That's something I would need direction on tonight because we are not making a recommendation like we did in January about how would you address this specifically. We just don't have direction on what a priority would be to do something in this area of that type. Now I'm going to, if there's any questions about the north, I can answer those now, or I'll jump to the southwest and go through the same review of the two maps. Okay, I'm going to jump.
Question.
Yep.
Quick. That is the old urban fringe plan, the current one.
Yes.
Am I right in thinking that that actually claims all the land up to Gilbert as possible room for expansion for the city of Ames?
The current plan actually designates all of the area between 180th and 190th as study area.
Okay.
So it's been on the map as an undecided area where only ag and farm services could occur. And then all of the jurisdictions retain their normal governmental authorities there. So if it's a subdivision close to Ames, it's Story County and Ames that review it. If it's a subdivision that's closer to Gilbert, it's Gilbert and Story County that review it. Based on the policies of the fringe plan, no one could annex into it though, because it's ag and farm services. You would have to amend the map to ever annex into it. So basically it was a placeholder for over 15 years as a study area.
And so we actually, in what we offered, backed off a little bit on that boundary, but said this is what we definitely want for the area that we've designated as urban reserve.
So staff tried to create an option that addressed the buffering question, but then from our perspective, if we're looking to grow north 190th someday, what should you be really looking at as an amount of territory? And I really go back to the Plan 2040 scenario work where we're trying to say, 5 to 10,000 people would be that next tier from that discussions we had. So if we did grow that way, you would want to plan to serve 5 to 10,000 people. What kind of land do you need? This was where I came up with this recommendation.
Thank you.
And the area that's in red that was returned, about how much land is that? How many acres?
It's probably 2 square miles. It's maybe similar, but a little bit less than the blue area. And it's not quite 2 square miles, but
Okay, thanks. So that was also removed.
yeah. And the reason for removing that is it was much harder for us to look at from a utility service perspective. To go that route was not a first choice of ours. So to say that was something in the next 10 years that was critical for planning, that was not necessary. But
Thanks.
so to the southwest, similar comments really focused on the urban reserve. What you see outlined in red was our first attempt to address changes requested by the county, where we had this area again, kind of encircling the southwest area, and we had retained the area on the north side of Whirly Creek in that urban reserve. And the reason we did that originally was that when we did the Plan 2040 scenario analysis, we did large chunks of study, like in groups of 15,000 people or more. And we looked at the southwest as well as west into Boone County. And the city elected to not use the southwest now. It was labeled as a tier 2 area and look more at the west into Boone County as a tier 1 area. So as a tier 2, it is able to be served. There are extensions of utilities needed. So that's why it was urban reserve. But in January, again, at the request of the board, City Council agreed to remove all of the southwest. So all of that green shaded area was to be removed from the urban reserve. It would go to ag and farm services. The only areas that were retained in the fringe plan were the blue area. And then you have the bit of an anomaly there with Meadow Glen, which is that yellow area along State Avenue. So we retained that blue area for the former Champlin piece because it's growth area. It's not urban reserve. We have water and sewer that's stubbed nearby. And then the Meadow Glen area, we all agreed to make that existing residential to recognize uniquely it's an older county subdivision. But if necessary, 80-20 annexations could be worked through that area. Unlikely that would happen with the way the map has evolved through this process, but it's still retained in that designation. So now the current proposal from the Board of Supervisors is to remove the blue area entirely in the southwest from the Champlin property, make that ag and farm services. The natural area overlays would be retained. And then kind of a minor issue is whether the urban reserve is on or off of the Meadow Glen neighborhood. And to me, that's not a significant issue one way or the other. But the bigger issue is really whether that Champlin property stays as blue. So if it came out, or even in the north, if we went with any of those proposals that have been proposed, and you ask, well, what happens 3 years from now if I want to change? So if we ended up adopting a plan that's based on what you've seen tonight, and we have any version of an agreement that's similar to the old one, it would take a vote of all three cooperators to amend a plan to change a map designation. So that would be the policy. That would be the policy of the fringe plan. As if it's agreed to, it takes all three of the cooperators to amend the plan. That's how the old plan was written, anyways. And then if you really were not able to work within those amendment processes, any agreement we have has to have the ability for a government to leave the agreement. That's required under state law. So with notice, you can leave an agreement. So if you were to go forward with this plan, you would be having to ask for amendments, look for unanimous support, or you would have to look to leave an agreement with 3 to 6 months of notice if you weren't willing to live with the limitations of the agreement. So that's how I'm kind of looking at it, as assuming we would operate the same way if we ever did adopt a new plan. The 2080 would be similar in that fashion about looking for amendment processes. And then again, you have to have an out process within a 2080. So any questions about the Southwest?
What happens if we do not have the 28E and an update to the urban fringe plan, and we're just operating under the Plan 2040 for this area?
For this, it will be universal, whether it's the Southwest, the Northeast, wherever it is. It'll operate a lot like how we operate with Boone County now. So right now, there's no fringe plan cooperative agreement with Boone County. So we retain all of our annexation authority and we retain all of our subdivision authority. So you're looking at case-by-case requests to consider waiving our subdivision improvement requirements or identifying what the city would expect from our subdivision code to approve a division in the county. Annexation, we would have complete autonomy. Whatever state code allows for someone to ask for annexation, we would have the ability to process that, and to, as long as we're not creating islands and have uniform boundaries, we have autonomy in making those decisions. So that would be the default. The policies of the fringe plan that where we would be in control would use that urban reserve overlay and our growth areas to really say, these are not areas we want to see rural development occur in. We have long-term goals to see this annexed into the city. So we would follow that policy as we can through the subdivision review or through annexation applications.
And how does that relate to what Story County is able to do in the same area without the 2080 or the plan?
So really, we both would have subdivision authority. So for a project to get approved, they have to meet both city standards, of whichever ones you choose to apply, and they have to meet county standards. So one cannot approve it without the other's approval. Now, the only other thing that they would continue to have authority over, which the fringe plan would have restricted, is that we do not control zoning in the county. So if the county wanted to zone something to a different zoning district to allow a different use there, we have no say in that matter. We only have say if it's a division. So let's say it's an existing quarter section. So they have 40 acres of land and the county's willing to rezone 40 acres of land and there's no division, they can do that. And we would have no input on that. Now, if they wanted to break up the 40 acres, that's where we're involved. That's really the give and take there, is they retain all zoning authority versus in the fringe plan, they agree not to rezone anything that's inconsistent with this plan.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Can you also talk a little bit about our ability to protect areas that are of concern, conservation areas, and what can happen, and what tools the council already has available to us to protect those sites?
Yeah, certainly. So in the fringe plan, one of the critical elements of it is the overlay for environmentally sensitive areas. So this map's perfect to talk about this. So that green is an overlay designating. County staff prepared this. It was based on a couple of different resources, aerial photography, other surveys that they had related to different kinds of natural resources, floodplain mapping. A lot of different things kind of got compiled together. If you go into Plan 2040, we have an environmental chapter as well, and we have some compiled resource maps there also. So it's pretty similar whether we were using the fringe plan or Plan 2040. We would have mapped areas of where we're confident we need to look at that in a closer detail. So then you ask, well, what would that mean if you're looking at it at a closer level? So let's assume it's annexed. The first chance City Council would dive into the details would be at a rezoning request. So if you were to take a property and you say this is the land use map, it's housing and natural resource overlay. So we would look at a rezoning request and they would propose a master plan showing areas they would like to develop and areas that would be not developed. That would be the first level of review. You can get into as much detail there as you want. Sometimes it's just a bubble diagram. Sometimes it's a little more specific. Another option or tool that we have is called an environmentally sensitive overlay. So rather than just a bubble diagram, council would have the authority to literally zone an area with an environmentally sensitive overlay, which means you can't disturb that area without a city council approval, either through a major site plan or through a platting process. Right now, we've only applied that to floodways in both the Skunk River and the Iowa Creek, but you could apply that to wetlands, you could apply it to riparian areas, you could apply it to anything that's a natural resource. And it triggers a study requirement. So you have to identify things that would be impacted by your activities and propose mitigation. So that would be one of the stronger tools that we have, is to use that overlay. So if you did not use those tools, you still come back to subdivision authority, because we're presuming if you annex to the city, you're probably not trying to just use the large piece of land that you had in the county, you're probably subdividing it. And we have within our subdivision authority the ability to look at impacts to natural features. So you have to make a finding that the proposed plat doesn't just meet our street requirements and our utility requirements, but you also have a chance to say it's incompatible with the natural resources that are on the site. So if somebody was filling a wetland, just because you can get a permit to fill a wetland does not mean that you have to approve that in a subdivision. There's a process that you would look at to evaluate that. You might agree it's okay to fill it because it's being mitigated somewhere else. You may not agree with that and make that finding. So in a natural resource area, you would make that case-by-case decision with a subdivision when you have information from the grading plans, from the stormwater management plans, all of those things. So at least 3 different times we'd have authority to look at that. Stormwater plans also have a natural resource inventory requirement. So again, staff is gaining a lot of information about the specific site, and we're making site-specific decisions when development proposals come in. And that's really all through the city council. Staff is not making those decisions. None of these projects would be approved with just staff interpreting something. It would be through a plat has a public hearing with the commission. It comes to council for approval, rezonings or hearings with the planning commission and with the city council.
Thank you.
So one follow-up question. If the 28E lapses and the county has zoning control over this area, do they also have a similar environmentally sensitive zoning that could be overlaid on this that would stop the city from expanding into that area in the future?
No zoning can stop city annexation. They're independent decision-making processes. So you can zone whatever you want in the county. You are only controlling county activities. You are not controlling city activities.
So if the city, let's say that the environmentally sensitive area around Worley Creek is designated that way by the county, and at some point the city decides they want to expand, then what happens to that area in our way of thinking based on anything historically that we've done? Do we say, well, this is clearly an environmentally sensitive area and therefore it impacts our decision making? Or is it entirely up to the council to say what they think about it?
So
the
at
future
the,
council?
so in our own comp plan, so once you've annexed, we stop looking at the fringe plan and we'll use our comp plan. So our new comp plan shows projected land use and greenways into growth areas. Our old plan just had a blob. It didn't tell you what was underneath the blob. So the fringe plan was kind of important. But our new plan is going to show a greenway in that same space. So when that rezoning request comes to the council, staff will always have a map that says the comp plan says residential or commercial and natural area. The rezoning would account for that in that master plan step. Council does have discretion. They mean that you get to interpret how consistent the rezoning is with the comp plan. You can amend a comp plan, but ultimately it's going to be front and center in any rezoning decision because it's already built into our comp plan.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you have any other comments you want to make right now?
There was a couple other policies that were not map based. So again, we had north growth of 190th Street was one question. The second question is the mapping in the southwest related specific to the Champlin property, and a secondary issue is the Meadow Glen area. Then you move into those three issues of the 2080, would it be extended with or without agreeing to the county's changes? And then there's two other policies that I haven't touched on that were new requests. The first was to have a policy we preferred a construction technique of directional drilling for utilities. We recently agreed to do that for the sewer extension near Sunset Ridge. We had to go through a county portion to connect to our existing sewer, and we agreed to do that through some of that sensitive area. So the county now requests that we have that as a preference for our utility extensions. I think staff would say that doesn't seem to fit the context of the plan. It's not that we wouldn't do directional boring, but not even knowing where the routing of these utilities are and the feasibility, it seemed to be an awkward policy that kind of put us in a tough spot of judging what a preference is when we don't even know exactly what our project is. So staff wasn't really in favor of adding that policy in this type of plan. And then the final request was, even with the urban reserve that is shown, to insert a policy that said that the city of Ames would not annex any land in an urban reserve unless we had exhausted the zoning options for infill in the city. So we had a workshop a few weeks ago talking about infill. There's a lot to work through there. And that the growth areas would be developed before we got to the urban reserves. Now we intend to do logical and efficient growth plans for the city, but Plan 2040 clearly acknowledges that it's possible that we will not complete all the growth in the southeast before we decide to expand to the west or to the north. So staff doesn't believe that policy is really consistent with Plan 2040. Now it's a 10-year time frame is what we're thinking about for this plan. Plan 2040 is for more time than that, but I really, again, that policy seems to be really hard for the city to manage the goals that we have in Ames Plan 2040 to have some flexibility to respond to the needs and to the market for housing around the city. So those are the 5 things that are the main issues in the Board of Supervisors letter. Staff doesn't have any particular recommendations to accept these changes, nor to provide any response back. So if council is interested in any of those policies and wants an option for that, you can send us back and come back with more information, which reminds me there was one other thing that wasn't a policy suggestion, but a process question. At the end of the Board of Supervisors letter, they did suggest that if we did not agree with their proposal, would we undertake an adoption of a fringe plan on our own and then convey that to the board, and then they would consider if they wanted to adopt the same plan that we adopted. I'm not in favor of that process. Us adopting a fringe plan has limited benefit to our current comp plan. If we had not recently done a comp plan, maybe it makes sense for us to do our own fringe plan. But in essence, we have very fresh policies regarding the periphery of the city. The level of detail, it would not rise up to a priority for the council versus other issues. So I'm not in favor of taking that on. And I think the real problematic part is not the land use plan, but the 2080. I don't think the city of Ames staff can write a 2080 without county staff participation to understand how and when things would get done with the county and how that would work. So to me, not working together doesn't really seem like it'd be a fruitful result and a good use of our time to do that. Now, if council wants to consider that as an option to officially decide that this is what we think our fringe plan is, I would recommend that you ask us to bring that back and staff bring a specific proposal. As you've seen, there's been an evolution over the last year about what the original draft is to where we are in January. I said in the staff report, I would probably go back to the November proposal if I was going to say what is just the best proposal for the city of Ames versus a compromise. But I think you'd want me to go look at that and bring you something specific rather than just say, go do what we did in January. And I'm not really sure what that means anymore. So that's everything. Any other questions?
All right, we're going to open up public input on this item, and I would ask a couple things. One is if people would limit their comments to 3 minutes or less. Secondly, if you agree with the prior individual's comments, you can, instead of just repeating the same comments over again, if you could just say I agree with the previous person, then you can add additional comments. And also, if you just identify if you are an Ames city resident or if you live outside the city of Ames. And I'd like to first recognize Mayor John Pop and invite him to come up. He indicated he wants to share some thoughts. And because he is one of the members of the 28E, if council has questions for Mr. Pop, he's willing to answer any questions. It's not a discussion, it's not a dialogue, it's not a round robin, but it's primarily he's willing to answer questions. But after that, no one else will be asked to, or we won't have a question and answer with anybody else. So Mayor Pop, thank you for coming.
Great, thank you. Well, City Manager Shanker and Mayor Hala and the city council members, I want to talk about the fringe agreement among the city of Ames, Story County, and the city of Gilbert. As mayor of Gilbert, I would like to ask you to give some consideration to what the Story County Board of Supervisors and the city of Gilbert has proposed for the area between Gilbert and the city of Ames. Maintaining this land as farm ground is the right decision to make. We have talked about the many reasons for this: prime farm ground, protection of the Ames water source and the Ada Hayden watershed, separation of the two cities, the effects on the Ames and Gilbert school districts, and the negative impact on the Gilbert-Franklin Township Fire Agency. I've also questioned past decisions in this area. Two in particular come to mind: giving developers the easy way out by waiving subdivision requirements and denying the request to bring the Homestead County mobile home lagoons at 190th and Highway 69 into the Ames sewer system. I believe both of these fall under the category of doing good. You followed the rules as written, you held the meetings, and you posted the signs. Just what's required. Which brings me to my point. Sometimes you have to decide between doing good and doing the right thing. I can share a personal experience of mine in this regard. When we built the new high school in Gilbert, we had an intersection to address that was a four-way stop sign. The intersection would have each of the legs going to 4 separate school buildings. The architect proposed a four-way stop with 4 turning lanes. We could have done the legal thing and just approved it. But instead, we chose to push back and proposed a roundabout for this intersection. In spite of the fact there was no roundabouts in the county, and the threats and the sky is falling comments, we did the right thing. I would like to share the many positive results we have seen from this action on this issue. I hope you will give some serious thought to your decision between doing good and doing the right thing. The benefits and positive results will be well worth your time and energy, and I thank you for listening to my thoughts.
Thank you, Mayor. Any comments or any questions for Mayor Pop?
Mayor Pop, thank you for coming. Um, uh, I watched the Board of Supervisors meeting with great intent, and so I sort of know some of the issues that were raised there, but you raised something that was new, at least for me tonight, and that was an issue on the schools. Could you expound on that a little bit? How should we think about the impact of this decision on the schools?
Well, we talked about maps, and without getting up to another map, but there's a school district map. And without getting into the exact details, there's the Gilbert School District thing comes all the way into Top of Hollow, as well as on the west side, all the way down to almost 13th Street, correct me if I'm wrong. So any development in that area affects the school districts. And the farther you come north, those tax dollars go to the Gilbert School District. They do not go to the Ames School District. So development in that area affects them both. And I think that needs to be considered as part of the discussion. That's the reason I bring that up.
And I appreciate that. And so I'm aware of that. So North and Bloomington, all those kids are in the Gilbert School District. But I don't mean to go back and forth, just for clarification. So if we do not go forward with a 2080 agreement, how does that change the calculus? Those tax dollars for the kids would always go to Gilbert. So nothing that we're doing impacts the boundary lines of the schools. In fact, development in this area is going to benefit arguably the Gilbert schools because there'll be more children and more tax dollars to go with those kids. So could you clarify, are there any, I guess maybe I should ask this way, are there any adverse effects on either the Gilbert schools or the Ames schools that you think would be important for us to know? That's really what I want to know.
Sure. Well, obviously, any additional children adds to building requirements and staffing requirements and all those things that go with that. And when you're talking about taking 40-acre chunks, that's a big commitment and could be a significant amount of additional students that might not have been planned for. So I just think that's pieces that need to be considered in the process because they're not in the 2080 agreement discussions as much as we are. And I think they need to be considered. That's why I bring it up, Tim.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I had a clarification. For the strip of farmland and ag services in between the cities, Ames has proposed the 1/4 mile. Are you supportive of just that as the boundary, or when you say you want to keep it farm services, is that the entire mile?
We had started with the entire mile. And with the work that's going on 190th and some of the development there, our last map mirrors very closely to what the county map was, the most recent suggestion, which was a 1/4 mile along that length. I guess we'd like to see that stopped at Grant Avenue. If I can point this out. For a couple reasons. One, the yellow line is the Ada Hayden watershed, which is an emergency source of water for the city of Ames. That keeping that in farmland, I think, is the best choice to help protect that watershed. So that's the only difference in the county's recommendation and the city of Gilbert's recommendation is those two blocks between Hyde and the railroad tracks for us locals.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mayor.
Great, thank you.
All right. Open up to anybody else that wants to address council.
Guess that's unfortunately me. Can't remember who did we get these to.
You can give it to Grace here. Thank you.
Mayor Gala, I'm representing a bunch of people. If I'm right around 3, is that all right? I'm just reading this.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Christine Hausner. I am an Ames resident, but I am representing my family home in Southwest Ames of 100 years. I've worked exhaustively over the last several years to try to prove how important the Whirley Creek corridor is and how we should be focusing on the conservation and the preservation of the area. I brought forth a lot of expert opinions. A couple of months ago, I started an online petition. At last count, we had 8,053 signatures. A lot of prominent people in the town have signed it, PhDs, professors, politicians, conservationists. So I just wanted to read what the petition is. The Whirley Creek corridor, I feel like I'm 10 feet tall. The Whirley Creek corridor rural community includes families who have acted as caretakers of the land and the environment for generations. The city of Ames, Iowa has voted to designate the area as urban growth in their proposed Ames Urban Fringe Plan, the highest priority for urban development. We live along Whirley Creek in Washington Township in Story County, a beautiful timbered area with creeks and its own ecosystem. The area is by definition a rural community because Iowa State University, which owns over 4,000 acres of research and teaching farms, surrounds us. If urban development were to occur here, it would destroy 2 creeks, the surrounding timber, and the ecosystem, all for a limited number of acres of land with no potential for future growth. The cost of losing a beautiful natural area and destroying the environment for very little gain is just too high. Environmental impact studies have been done on our area, and multiple experts in their field, including our local chapter of the Audubon Society, have supported us in our endeavor to preserve this area and protect it from urban development. Much of this area has been designated as environmentally sensitive. We have rare plants and protected birds and wildlife here. Urban development in this area would drastically change our homes and rural lifestyle to paved roads, city traffic, and being surrounded by hundreds of houses. It would cause the destruction of our environment and wreak havoc on the ecosystem. Rural development protects both the environment and the ecosystem here. We agree with the Washington Township trustees and ask the Story County supervisors and the city of Ames to remove all properties in Southwest Ames from the urban growth designation and the city of Ames proposed Ames Urban Fringe Plan. Keep the area in ag and farm service, which is where it belongs, or have no fringe plan at all. As stewards of this land, it deserves our respect and protection. We are fighting for our neighbors and for our way of life. We are fighting for the land and the wildlife that cannot fight for itself. The environment should not be negotiable. Too often in this day and age, the environment becomes the sacrificial lamb. This destruction of our natural resources for financial gain has got to stop. There is zero possibility to mitigate the damage to our environment and ecosystem with urbanization. If there were, why would there be so many experts supporting its conservation and protection? So the last thing I would just like to say is the Story County supervisors are giving you 22,000 acres, carte blanche to do what you want with. You used 4,000 in the last 5 years, and this is for a 5-year plan. We're asking you to take 150 acres out. Much of that is already marked as environmentally sensitive. So that's all we're asking for, 150 acres. That's it. So please, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Rosalind Brandt. I live in an unincorporated area of Story County, north of Ames. I have had concerns about Ames City Council's wishes for the renewed Ames Urban Fringe Plan and have spoken at Story County Board of Supervisors meetings regarding them. However, after reading the Ames Planning and Zoning Department's recommendations to council, which are attached to the agenda for your meeting tonight, it sounds like their recommendation is to dissolve the current fringe plan. By doing so, will the 2-mile area around Ames that was served by the fringe plan be up for grabs when it comes to annexation and development? Would Story County have a say on how this land is used? I need to say I don't understand the need of Ames to sprawl and develop over the prime farm land and environmentally protected land in the area around Ames. Story County has a C2C plan and a housing plan that clearly states Story County's intentions to keep the characteristic look and use of its land established in its rich agricultural history. Ames, you are a city in Story County. You must have had input in and agreement with the intentions of those 2 plans. How does your urban sprawl fit with those 2 Story County plans? I know you are looking into an infill and revitalization plan for Ames. Thank you for that. But when Story County asks you to fill areas within your border, and planned growth areas before you sprawl into the urban reserve, you say no. Why? Since 1977, I've seen the north border of Ames continue to spread over acres and acres of prime farmland, as well as other environmentally sensitive areas. Recently, you've added a large number of acres for development in the north, as well as in other directions from Ames. Why do you now need to add even more acres? You haven't filled these recent developments, and I see home for sale signs in developed areas. How does the urban sprawl of Ames fit with your lengthy and I'm told quite expensive environmental plan? Where are the jobs to be filled by the residents of these outlying areas? How will they get to these jobs? Ames continually references their already approved Plan 2040 for the rationale to sprawl. How much input did you receive from the residents in the unincorporated areas of Story County around Ames when Plan 2040 was developed? Did they really agree to let you sprawl over prime farmland and environmentally sensitive areas around Ames? I've read enough minutes of the Ames City Council meetings to know you regularly amend or change this plan in other ways when it fits your needs. Please consider the needs of others in Story County now. I could go on, but I'll finish by saying that when the Ames Urban Fringe Plan was first pitched to those of us in Story County who attended the meetings, it was pitched as a buffer around Ames where no development would take place. Since then, it has evolved into a well-oiled plan to grab and control prime land for development by Ames. The number of acres you asked to add in the renewal document for the Ames Urban Fringe Plan nearly doubled the size of Ames. Really? Please stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Kim Christensen, 2985 South Dakota Avenue. I agree with both the other two speakers. Really well said. I would be here only to represent and myself, the trustees of the Washington Township. And I don't believe that I have actually read the statement of position to the council. So I'm going to do that now. This was done on May 2022. We are gravely concerned about the proposed Ames Urban Fringe Plan and how it would affect Washington Township and Story County, Iowa. Township property and growth are necessary to support and maintain our volunteer fire department and other services. Due to the years of annexation and expansion of the Ames city boundaries, Washington Township has shrunk from 23,400 acres to less than 12,000. The township territory has further limited by 3,100 acres of Iowa state-controlled land, more than half of which are not taxed. Story County's proposed urban fringe plan gives complete control of the city of an additional 5,800 acres, leaving less than 3,100 acres in the entire township for possible rural growth. In order to protect and possibly expand Washington Township's tax base in the future, the township trustees respectively request the following actions. Eliminate the urban reserve from all ag and farm service designations in Washington Township. Remove the urban growth designation from the Meadow Glen rural subdivision, change it to rural residential existing. And 3, remove the urban growth designation from the area north of Zumwalt Station Road and replace it with ag and farm service designation with no urban reserve. That's the Champlin property. And that's signed Pamela Savalese, Robert Finch, trustee, Kevin Winchell, trustee, and Kim Christensen, trustee. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Kim. Anybody else?
Liesl Danielson, 2981 South Dakota Avenue. I am outside of city limits. We have been a part of the 2040 plan. We watched, we spoke, we wrote letters, and we have been a part of the Ames Urban Fringe Plan. We've come to every meeting. The Story County supervisors have listened to us, and I would ask you to do the same. Sorry.
That's okay.
You won't. Sorry. Every time, you won't find a neighborhood that cares more about their land and their neighborhood and their neighbors. You won't find one that cares more than us. That's why we have shown up, and that's why the supervisors have listened to us. That's why they keep coming back, and they have stood firm with us. And I would very much ask that you do the same. It is not worth it. There is nowhere to go on this land, and it would be destroyed with urban growth, and that's why we're here. Because we're asking you to stand with us, protect the area. That's why we keep coming. So I would ask you to listen to us and listen to the supervisors and know that we're not standing for nothing. I'm sorry. Feels like our last chance here. And I would ask you to please remove it. Keep it an egg and farm service, but stays protected. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Here's the cards, okay. Phil Lycevely, 3108 South Dakota Avenue. I wasn't going to speak, but a thing came to mind that has not been discussed at all. And is the fact that Iowa State and the Kent Feed Company are nearing completion of the feed mill that is going to be at the corner of, or that is on State Avenue and Highway 30. It's right there by the overpass. I'm sure many of you have seen it being built. And from the experience that I have where I live on 3108 on the South Dakota R38, there is, I don't know where they're going, but there are semis going by there constantly, going to, I'm assuming, ethanol plants with either grain or whatever. But when the feed mill is completed and fully functional, it'll be processing grain for the different farms, and right along State Avenue to farther to the south are 1, 2, 3, I think there's 4 or 5 Iowa State farms besides Ag 450 that's there, and the dairy farm, the poultry farm, hog farm, beef, teaching are all there, besides swine nutrition and so forth that are to the north. Beef reproduction farm. Anyway, the amount of traffic that will sooner or later develop on State Avenue, along with the traffic that is already very, very high on R38, I think will really impact any development that happens at the Chaplain Farm. Right now, we know that when you take out all the environmental and so forth, there's only going to be about 75 acres that are actually developable. I do not believe the present owner of the Chaplain Farm intends to develop that, but who knows? I mean, if somebody comes and gives them $8 million, he'll probably sell it. But on the other hand, I think you need to consider that the southwest area surrounded by over 4,000 acres, and that's not over into Boone County. That's just from County Line Road to the east that are controlled by Iowa State. Iowa State just bought 2 more farms. So, and their intention is to continue to purchase that ground because they want all the teaching farms to be within 15 minutes of campus. So I would hope that you would consider at least the removal of the southwest area as was indicated on the January 10th agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Anybody else?
Hi, Alex Christensen, 2984 South Dakota Avenue, just outside the city limits. First, I just want to say thank the mayor for giving us the chance to speak tonight. I really appreciate it. And I have a newborn at home, so I didn't get a chance to repair anything. Still struggling to function right now, but I just want to throw my support behind those that did speak. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll close public comment. Kelly, I just want to, one of the commenters asked the question, what happens if the fringe plan does not get renewed? And I think the term was, is the land up for grabs? Can you kind of just explain what, if the fringe plan is not renewed, how's that interface with the Ames 2040 plan? What goes forward from there?
Right, so it's a combination of two things. The city would be one of two parties to review subdivisions within 2 miles of the city, and if it was closer to us instead of Gilbert. We overlap with Gilbert, so if it's closer to Gilbert, they're the review authority, not us. But Story County and the city have to review subdivisions. So Story County can't just approve rural subdivisions because they want to, unless we agree. Now, our authority is really based in following our own code. And what typically happens is people don't want to put in city infrastructure for rural developments. What they're really asking is for you to waive city requirements. If you, again, you do not have zoning authority, you have subdivision authority. In terms of annexation, it is up to the cities to decide whether they accept an annexation petition and follow state law for annexations. The counties, the townships have no say in approving or denying an annexation. They can make a recommendation about it, but they have no authority in the process directly. So the county would retain all of its own zoning authority. They can rezone anything they want. They can allow whatever conditional uses they want without our input or Gilbert's input. So it's kind of a blend. Subdivisions, two authorities review. Zoning is the county. Annexations is the cities.
So the point being is that having a fringe plan or not having a fringe plan in no way affects the annexation of land. Is that correct?
Well, the policies of this fringe plan guided annexation to where it was allowed or not allowed. If there's no fringe plan, then we would just follow our own policies about whether it's appropriate to the city or not.
So if a property owner from the north or south or whatever wants to annex into the city and develop it, then that becomes, we just follow our Ames 2040 plan. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. All right, any closing questions, comments? All right, hearing none, I would entertain someone putting a motion on the table so we can have a either discussion or take action on it.
Mayor, since I was the one who wanted us to continue our discussions with the county because I value, and with Gilbert as well, because I value that partnering, I am going to put on the table option 2 as a motion.
Is there a second? And why don't you just identify what that motion is, please, Gloria?
To direct city staff to prepare a modified proposal to respond to the cooperators.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, discussion.
Curious what you had in mind for modified proposal.
Well, I have had concerns about this, especially the issue in the Southwest, for quite some time. And with the discussions of our climate action plan, it seems to me the preservation of our natural areas becomes even more important. And while I realize that there are very few chances that we're actually going to be annexing that area while I am still on council, it just feels to me like I would rather determine what is happening to that area in discussions with the county. And I guess my preference would be that we would remove that area, not only because of the natural areas, but because of the, all of that land that belongs to Iowa State and the somewhat landlocked nature of this area. And I recognize that that is not necessarily what is technically in the best interest of Ames growth, but it's a motion. If you don't support it, please, vote your conscience.
Go ahead, Rowan.
So the change you're suggesting would be the same as our recommendation last time, minus this 150 acres?
Yes.
And I would clarify, we would probably address the Meadow Glen area. If we were doing anything, we would probably clean up the Meadow Glen area because I feel like that's not consequential. But I would not respond just in relation to that one issue of Meadow Glen.
Yeah, and I would be in favor of that as well.
I mean, don't we have more control over it though? If
I don't know. Honestly, I have been going back and forth over this, and in some ways, I feel it may be more advantageous if the county has control of it.
well, I mean, it depends though, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it depends on who's in charge.
Exactly. So I don't know that one of these choices is better than the other. I just know that I feel that the partnering with Story County and Gilbert has been important to us, and that I've seen a lot of commitment from the people who live in this area, and the evidence that we have received about the natural, the delicacy of the natural environment there. Just, it makes me rethink where I stand on this, and so that's why I'm making this motion.
Any further comments or questions on this one?
Can you remind me how much of that area is developable? Of the 150?
I would agree with the commenter that said maybe 75 acres. It's a little hard to tell exactly what it would be, but it's definitely not the full 4 parcels that are, the Champlin parcel is more than one parcel. So it's multiple properties. Yeah, it's probably in that 70 to 80, maybe 90 acres at tops.
Thank you.
Everyone understand the motion?
I mean, I would offer respectfully, my time in council has done nothing but to increase my confidence that the city of Ames is a good steward with lands that are environmentally sensitive. I can't find an example where we had the opportunity to steward a very tricky situation where we didn't end up making it better. So I'm quite confident that the city of Ames will continue to be a good steward with this. And respectfully, the county has continued to ask the city of Ames to negotiate itself for months. And this would be yet another opportunity for us to further negotiate against ourselves. It's been one of the strangest negotiations I've ever seen. And I think we can work with the sentiment that you have of being a good steward with this area within the existing structure we have. Kelly explained that in the Ames 2040 plan, we didn't ignore those areas. We called them out in ways that had never been done before. And so I am very confident that this community has a high expectation for conservation, and I think we would do a good job of that. I think that would be a reason to not support this motion.
Kelly, could you talk a little bit about the options that we would have for conservation
Under what scenario?
in the 2040 plan?
Absent the 28E? Thank
Yeah.
you.
We would only have a say if there was a subdivision or an annexation. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
And then within the city, we'll go through that same conversation that you would have authority through rezoning to look at it from a master plan perspective or put an overlay on it. And then in the subdivision review is where you have the most direct authority related to conformance to natural features and resource management on the site based on specific layouts and a review of a stormwater management plan and a resource inventory that would go along with that. And then if it's in the county, we wouldn't have any input. It would default to county zoning and county development processes. But if they were to try to develop in the county, our subdivision authority would still apply.
Mhm.
And you would have to look through our same lenses of whether it's approvable or not, along with Story County looking at it.
And this is a little to the side, but I know Ada Hayden has come up a couple of times, and I don't know if you're prepared to speak to that, but what was done in that area to protect the watershed, since that's been brought up a few times?
Yeah, so with water quality and it really being the management of a resource that's offsite, we used a conservation subdivision ordinance. So it has an on-site inventory requirement. So we do analyze and see, is there a remnant prairie? Are there wetlands? Is there riparian area? Those things are all analyzed within the conservation ordinance. Its main focus is to not have mass grading and large disturbances of areas, to try to keep some of the same terrain while doing houses, but then it has a layout component where there's a 25% open space requirement and 80% of your lots have to be around open space. All that was designed to help facilitate water flow management, to get it treated and being in contact with landscape-based treatment measures before it got off site. So it was a lot of different things kind of grouped together into that conservation ordinance.
Thank you.
So Kelly, take that one step further. And I want you to correct me if I'm saying this incorrectly, but when that land was taken out of taken out of production for row crop use, it actually improved the watershed, because instead of dumping nitrogen and phosphorus on the soil, we have grass that's growing. We have procedures for maintaining the surface water flowage. And I think we're going to see, if anything, an improvement in protection of our water quality. And that's not just sort of a subjective, that's a quantifiable, measurable benefit to our watershed. I'm trying to summarize things that I've heard up here. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, and I'm not the direct authority, John or Tracy or John would be that. But yeah, I would say you're recounting everything I've heard, that when it's a row crop property and you use our conservation ordinance and our stormwater management plan, we're improving the stormwater runoff quality of that water through that development process when it's row crop, which is what we're looking at to the north up here in the 190th area.
And I hope that's encouraging to people. So there are those who have very strong feelings, and I don't know if there's anything that we can say that would be persuasive, but we're just really not making this stuff up. There really are benefits of using these conservation overlays to improve the environment. So I think we've got a good track record. I'm very proud of what we've done here in Ames on that score.
Okay, so everyone understand the motion? If this motion passes, then I'm going to ask for some more specific direction to staff to know. Go ahead.
Mayor, was there a second?
Yes.
Yeah,
Broadway.
Broadway.
Yeah, we wouldn't have had discussion without that. Thank you. All right, roll call, please.
Nay.
Aye.
Nay.
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 Aye.
Okay, motion fails. Is there another motion?
I'd move option 3.
Which is,
Take no action in response to the proposals.
and let the current 28E agreement expire?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Kelly, one of the things that I learned from you, I don't know, I think it was a year ago when this first came up, was that most cities and counties don't have a 28E agreement. I guess I assumed everyone did. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, there's not very many examples of fringe plans with cooperative agreements that are like what Story County and Ames and Gilbert have.
And so that's important. The sky's not falling if we don't have an agreement. Most cities and counties don't. So I just think that's an important backdrop. We're not going into uncharted territory by letting this expire.
Any other comments? Roll call.
Aye.
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 All right. So you will notify the,
Yep, I'll prepare a letter to both cooperators and say no action has been taken in regards to any other requests.
Mayor, if I could, I just think it's important to acknowledge the staff work on this project. Kelly, you have worked tirelessly in trying to find consensus and trying to work with the county and trying to distill what we have communicated. And so this has been a lot of work, and just publicly want to thank you for your work on this.
You're welcome.
all right. We will move on to item number 24, persons living in their vehicles on city street update. Thanks, Phil.
Good evening. So 2 council meetings ago, the council first looked at this issue, and then there was a motion to come back with recommendations or options on the limiting the size of vehicles on city streets and residential areas. I took it to be residential areas. And then also there was another motion to look into some other aspects of this situation. I've written a memo. I've, involved a lot of city staff and different departments in looking at various aspects of this, and then also checked with the Story County Board of Health. They did call me back after I finished this memo. So I was playing phone tag for a while with a person there, and then I kept calling and getting no response. But it turns out the person was out for a week, and so they did call me back, and they confirmed what I suspected, and that was that they did not have any jurisdiction over this issue. So in terms of the, we can talk if you have any questions about all those other aspects that are mentioned in my memo. We certainly, I'd be happy to respond to those. In terms of the options on length, I gave 3 options here, and let me just explain those. The 25-foot length was suggested by one of our traffic engineers. And he's the one that told me that Ford F-350 trucks were just under 23 feet long. So he suggested 25 as being safe and not prohibiting any pickup trucks. 23 would also do that. So I mentioned that as an option. 20 feet I put in there because that's what Cedar Rapids and Iowa City do. And that was in my memo last time we talked about this. So those are the different options. I also had Sherry from Parking Enforcement, and then Damian from Traffic suggest that that prohibiting certain types of vehicles, commercial vehicles, however that might be defined, might be an easier thing to enforce than a size limitation. So I threw that in as well. There's, you have to think about people that, someone is an electrician and they have a truck that they drive and they park it in front of their house. Is that something that we want to prohibit? And, maybe there are ways to exclude that or not. So here are the options, and, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
So I just want to be clear, with regard to the health and safety issues, nobody has jurisdiction over any of those issues other than if there were an animal control issue and these particular animals that are in the case in point are not in a dangerous situation.
Right.
Which is not to say that we should ever be legislating just for one case. But in the future, if someone identified a problem with animal health because of those animals living in a vehicle on the street, we would have the authority to have animal control check the welfare of the animal.
Yes, yes. And with our ordinance, we had that authority anywhere in the city of Ames, in private homes, in, in a vehicle that someone's living in, on the streets, anywhere.
All right, open up public input. Is there anyone that wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Is there any motion relative to this topic?
Mark, could you talk to us a little bit about, so this was very helpful to see the alternative to length limitation. I worry about the law of unintended consequences. And so we might start with this and then find out something we didn't realize and come back and change this. We always have that option. But from the perspective of between limiting based on length versus the type of the vehicle, could you speak to us in terms of what you see as the risk of unintended consequences?
In terms of limiting the length, I think that, it sort of depends on the length. I mean, if you go with 25 feet or even 23 feet, I think you're okay, unless, Ford makes a new huge pickup truck that's, 24 feet long. But, you can also decide you don't want those parked on the street. Right? So I'm not sure that I can think of any unintended consequences with that. And there are certainly, some safety issues, being able to see around them as you're driving down the street, that sort of thing, with larger vehicles. And as I said, both Iowa City and Cedar Rapids have limited the size of vehicles parked in the residential areas. When it comes to prohibiting commercial vehicles, I think, potential unintended consequences, what I was just talking about, do we really want to keep a plumber or an electrician who has their truck and they drive it out and go to work every day, and from parking on the street because their vehicle's, over 20, is a commercial vehicle. So maybe, that's a decision for the council, but I think that would be of concern.
In Iowa City, what the motivation was for Iowa City and Cedar Rapids to limit the size of their vehicles?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I just looked at their ordinances. I didn't investigate the reasoning behind it.
All right, I like council to take some kind of position on this, whether it's do nothing. I have a motion regarding that because we have gotten letters from people who have complained about the situation. And so I think it's important to go on record, not just let this die. So if there's no interest in doing anything, that's fine. But I have a motion to saying that no further action is to be taken on this item right now, or one of the options that Mark has laid out, or something else you might have in mind.
I move that we take no action on this item.
Second.
Okay. Any closing comments?
Yes, I have several. So our streets and roads are designed and built by the city and paid for by the taxpayers. That's important to note, for the purpose of providing transit and parking. And so we have an issue before the city tonight as far as whether public streets the use of them should be revised to include housing. And for that, we actually have some precedents. So we have our city parks, our city buildings, for example, the library, where we say that residing in our library or residing in our parks is not acceptable. That is a longstanding precedent. And so I believe that applies to our city roads and streets as well. And we speak often about the importance of protecting our neighborhoods. I think if we step away from regulating this, we will be abandoning our neighborhoods. And one of the sets of lenses that I use when I evaluate most everything that we do is whether I would want a particular outcome to happen in my neighborhood. And I've had lots of people that have shared with me the utter dismay that we have not taken some kind of action because there are communities, and I'll give an example, Bozeman, Montana, which is a similar size to Ames, although the price of housing is much higher, where they're not looking at just a single bus. They have multiple RVs and other vehicles that are parked in residential neighborhoods. And I think the mayor is right. I think this council needs to decide whether we are going to abandon these neighborhoods and in essence foist these types of living situations into those neighborhoods. We have an election coming up in November. I think the council needs to take a clear stand and tell the community what their view is. And if you believe that we should allow people to live in vehicles on our streets, would you be okay with them living in our parks? Would you be okay if somebody rolled out a sleeping bag in the library and said, you know, I think I'm going to live here? How do you say no to the library? How do you say no to Brookside Park if you allow someone to live in the neighborhood? We took great pains to take public input on the location of the pool around O'Neill Park. But we're not doing any kind of public input on this matter to see if neighborhoods around the community would like to have buses and RVs taking residents in their neighborhood. I think the precedents are clear, and I think we have an obligation to the people of this community that we cannot abandon tonight. I'm open to discussions as far as the way in which we do this. I think the 25-foot vehicle limit is enforceable. It's easy to see whether a vehicle reaches that. And I trust our law enforcement to approach these matters with great care and discretion as they always do. I don't see our police going out and on first opportunity removing these vehicles. I think they would work hard to find solutions as they always do. But I think if you're supporting a measure of walking away from this issue tonight, I think the mayor is right. I think you need to explain why.
Any other comments?
I would say that I'm walking away from this tonight because I have heard from people who have RVs or who have parked their moving vans on the street that fall within that 25-foot range. And we also have people in this community who are living in their cars. And if we're going to say, well, we're going to legislate people living in a vehicle, then the 25-foot rule isn't going to stop people from living in their vehicles and will be criminalizing those who are unhomed. And so I had concerns, especially about the health and safety issues. It sounds like we don't have control over most of those issues, but that our animal control and that our police are doing what they can within our current ordinances. And so I believe that there will be unintended consequences if we support the 25-foot rule. Some of that may be unintended in that it won't do any good to stop complaints because we may have people living on our streets who aren't living in buses. And so I just don't think that this makes a lot of sense for us to put in place an ordinance that doesn't accomplish the goals for health and safety for our community.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll agree with you, Gloria, on that. And I appreciate what you said, Tim, about having safe neighborhoods, but I really think we need to be thinking about our most vulnerable citizens, those who are unhoused, and their safety matters too. And being able to sleep in their vehicle with a roof over their head is better than being out in the environment. It's a form of shelter for some people in our community, and some people, even in different circumstances, might need to sleep in their vehicle. And so I'll be voting for this, dropping the issue.
Okay. So, do you have something else, Bronwyn?
No, I was just going to say that I think I made my opinion on why I'm not supportive of further restrictions last time, but I'd say it again that I don't want to be in a situation where we are, further criminalizing being unhoused by issuing tickets or towing someone's vehicle. I don't see that has a good ending, and it's not a circumstance that I think anyone or many people would relish living in their vehicle, so I don't see it as a risk where if we allow it this once, all of a sudden we'll be overrun. I think that's a little alarmist for the reality of the situation, given that we've only had one situation that's brought a complaint to us. So, but again, I've said that before. So,
any fresh comments?
Yes, I would like to respond, Mayor, to that. We've heard several times this phrase, criminalizing the unhoused. And I respectfully want to suggest that ship sailed a long time ago. We do not allow people to live in our parks. And if you think that that's a problem, then I would encourage you to make a follow-up motion to say that we should allow people to live in our parks. And for that matter, I think we should have a motion to people to live in a public library. What is the difference between living in a park and living on the street? We have precedents for this. This is not a matter of criminalizing the unhoused. This is a red herring. The people who live in those neighborhoods where that bus is parked, we represent them as well. We cannot abandon those people. And if you think that this is going to be just a single vehicle, I think that's naive. I think that we have communicated, City of Ames is open, bring your RV, bring your bus, come and live here, because that's what you're saying. But it is clearly not criminalizing the unhoused. If you believe that, then we need to change the rules with respect to our parks and whether people can live in our library.
And I guess my comment would be that they own those vehicles. That's not the same as being in the library or in the park in places that they don't own if they are in their own vehicle.
You've lost me. What's the difference between a tent in a park and a bus on the street? They're both enclosures.
They are enclosures, but what we're talking about actually having a policy regarding is not about tents, but about vehicles. And so I'm keeping it on that topic.
But it's the same, Anita. We have lots of parks. We could house lots of homeless people in our parks. And so do you think that that's criminalizing the homeless if we tell people they can't live in our parks?
What's before us today is this issue.
It is not.
That is what I'm responding to.
And this is respectfully, this is where we're not thinking properly about this. With all due respect, we have to think about all our public spaces. And we have clear policies on this. We have followed it for decades. And we are abandoning our neighborhoods. And so I think our commitments to neighborhoods is ringing hollow when we abandon them tonight.
So I don't think you're making points that are valid. I think that they have merit. For me, I think we open up an entire other issue when we start talking about banning vehicles of a certain size on city streets. And I think if we have an interest in protecting neighborhoods and looking at the behaviors that exist in neighborhoods, we have ordinances in place that address how homeowners use their property so that they don't disrupt the quality of life of those surrounding them. And if we want to look at those things in terms of this particular situation or future situations that might arise if we are going to be inviting people to live on our streets, then I think that is a much better way to go about it than just blatantly putting a ban on vehicles of a certain size.
I'm open to suggestions. This is new territory. When Mark put out feelers with his peers, there weren't a lot of other options out there. I mean, he was going all over the country to find examples. But we have examples of cities that have completely lost their mind with respect to how they handle these issues. In areas that are public spaces are now overrun. This is an important opportunity for the city of Ames to protect our neighborhoods. That's what I see this as. It's nothing to do with criminalizing the homeless.
Any other questions or any other comments? Excuse me. Roll call.
Nay.
Sorry. The motion is to drop the issue, right?
That's correct.
Aye.
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 Nay.
Aye.
Motion passed.
Can I make a follow-up motion?
Sure.
I would ask that we get a memo from staff on the current city ordinance that prohibits people living in a vehicle on public or private property in commercial and industrial zones only.
You're asking if there is one or development?
No, I believe that there is one. What I'm asking for is just a memo to just remind council about our policy that would prohibit people from living in vehicles
Well, that does.
on private We have one currently that does prohibit people from living in vehicles on private or public property. And I would like to look at I would like for a memo on that, specifically as it.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
All right, go ahead.
Specifically as it pertains to commercial and industrial zoning areas.
That was part of your motion.
The reason for this is that from what I understand, what I've been told anyway, is that Walmart has a policy that would allow people to reside in a vehicle in their parking lot overnight. But in Ames, we have a law that would prohibit that. So they can't do that, even in Ames, even though they do it in other places and it's allowed. And Tim, you make a good point. I mean, I do think, I want to look at how we can make things easier for people that already have it very hard. So, and I'm proposing just commercial and industrial zones, not residential at this time.
And I just want to add that I did mention that it's a zoning ordinance, and I mentioned that in my memo last time. So if you want to go back and look at that, you can see what it says. So.
But you want a report from Mark to show you what the existing law is. So what you're asking for?
Well, she said staff, not Mark.
Fine, I'll do it.
It sounds like we have it already.
Can we?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
we,
if you'd rather, I could just do a motion, put that on.
No, we could agree that that exists.
Yeah.
You want us to
I would
explore the possibility, I think
Yes.
you're getting at, maybe changing, you want under consideration
Yeah.
on the agenda, consider it changing to allow parking on private property in industrial and commercial areas. Isn't that what you want before the council?
Well, I want us to think about what it means. So I guess I would like a memo with those options. And then once we see that, maybe we could then decide if we'd like to put it on a future agenda.
Oh, okay. Just a memo then, not on the agenda yet.
Right. I would like council to have time to digest that before we would decide we want to put it on a future agenda.
But that's your goal, is it not, maybe to modify that to allow this kind of parking on private property in industrial and commercial areas, which the memo will show you does not allow, right?
Right.
I'll read the motion back, Grace, make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah, I have a memo from staff on current city ordinance that prohibits people from living in vehicles on private or public property, specifically focused on commercial and industrial zones, followed with options to modify it.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, everyone understand the motion? Those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstaining? Motion carried. Anything else?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. We'll move on to item number 25, resolution allocating FY 22-23 city asset reserved funds for housing services. Deb.
Good evening, council. So about a year ago, when you took action on asset recommendations, one of the recommendations was to set aside some funds that were unallocated and set them aside especially for housing services. And the amount of those funds was $11,652. Not a lot, but certainly something that organizations could use to address housing needs here in the city. And so I notified agencies that the city currently contracts with for housing services. And one of the caveats was that the requests that they were going to make had to be for services that were currently in our contract for fiscal year 22-23. So before you are the three agencies who requested funds for those services. And I do want to point out in the table, it shows what the status of their original allocation is. And one of the agencies, the Salvation Army, still has funds that are available. The reason for that is they're drawing their funds down a little bit differently than some of the other agencies, and it's okay per our contract. But Salvation Army is drawing down 1/12 of the allocation each month, and that is so that they can spread the dollars throughout the year versus using all the dollars within a shorter time frame during the fiscal year. The other two agencies, Access and the Bridge Home, did draw down their funds for those services, emergency shelter services, earlier because they drew them down for all of the units of service that they were providing within those months. So that's the difference within those allocations. I do have representatives here from each of the agencies. So if you have questions about their requests, they're here to help respond to those questions. But the alternative one is approving requests, some funds for each of the agencies for services that they are currently providing, and be happy to take any questions that you have about the recommendations or the requests.
Questions for Deb? I just have a quick one. That is, how did you arrive at the apportionment in your alternative one?
Yep. So I took a look at the requests and based on the information that was provided, Access, for example, so they're getting the larger, or the recommendation is for a larger share of the dollars. It's because they exhausted their city funds in October of last year, and their request is for emergency shelter. And so if they can provide emergency shelter for the clients that they're serving, then they're not having to refer those clients to the Bridge Home shelters. So they can serve those clients within all of their services with the dollars going to their shelter. Salvation Army, they have access, actually all the agencies have access to some dollars that are available through United Way. They have a separate grants process that's available. So Salvation Army would have access to those dollars as well. And the Bridge Home, they are going to be making a similar request to the county as they're making to the city for dollars that are available yet through the county that were set aside for housing services.
Thank you. All right, we'll open up public comment. Is there anyone that wants to address council on this topic? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Entertain a motion.
I'd move alternative one.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Aye.
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 Very good. Thanks, Deb.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
All right, move on to number 26, request for Ames Pride Fest on September 30th, 2023.
Brian left. I'm gonna have to do this one. The item before you deals with a request to help facilitate, I believe it's the 4th annual Ames Pride Fest, which is scheduled to occur on Saturday, September 30th. On the council action form, there were, I think, 5 bulleted requests to the city council. Now, normally this would be very straightforward, be on the consent agenda, but I want to call your attention to the last 2 bullets, and it deals with parking. And I believe because of your policy regarding parking at special events in the downtown area, we're going to need some direction from you. You'll notice the fourth bullet down, the group is asking for suspension or waiver of fees for the parking spaces along Fifth and Douglas. And that's where the event is going to occur, if you can picture that, right? The second request is a waiver for the parking fees in the city's parking lot S and the library lot Q, okay? Now, I just want to call your attention because we need your direction. Below that, I've put in the council action form your policy that metered parking fees will not be waived for special events. Any event organizers intending to provide free parking or to close meter parking spaces must reimburse the city's parking fund for lost revenue. However, the city council may consider waivers to this policy on a case-by-case basis for parking spaces that are obstructed in the event area. So that'd be the fourth bullet, remember? So it's pretty clear cut from us. Our recommendation is based on past action by the council on your case-by-case basis. That's where you have waived the parking fees on the areas that you have the event. So in this case, it's the street parking on Fifth and Fifth Street and Douglas. So that's pretty straightforward. So that's our primary recommendation. That's, according to your policies, a case-by-case waiver. So we're kind of bound by this now. So that's why our recommendation deals with all the other requests we certainly want to support, plus the waiver of the street, the meters that deal with the event. I do want to point out the group is not asking for blanket waiver of the whole downtown area, which sometimes that happens. It's really in two isolated smaller areas. But again, according to your policy, we as staff can't recommend it. But we've given you different options, of course, and you can handle it the way you'd like to. So I don't know if there's any other questions you might have, or the organizers might want to speak to it, but we're certainly in support of all the event and any way we can help. But just this one extra request, which I don't believe it's the first time I think they requested parking above and beyond the event area. And your policy doesn't allow us to recommend that. So any questions?
Steve, how would this be similar or different from the denial for the Ames Downtown Farmers Market in terms of parking?
You mean why we approved?
We
approved it.
But there was some aspect of that we denied the request for a waiver on Farmers Market.
I'm trying to remember if they
About
required
$2,000.
I don't remember if there was the whole area they were asking for.
Didn't that first
The
fail?
first motion failed.
Yeah.
So we were,
So the second motion was to approve the request. And that passed.
Any other questions?
No, in other areas for the downtown, on a limited basis, we have budgeted funds. Remember the request from the downtown, not every event they have, but their major events, we predetermine and you grant them money to actually reimburse the parking fund as part of your approval. And that's not the case in this situation.
Okay, open up public input. Does anyone want to address council on this topic? If you would introduce yourself and then you may proceed.
Yes, I am the chair of Ames Pride Fest 2023. So I submitted all of this information.
I'm sorry, would you just give your name for the record?
Oh, yes, Katie Chop.
Thank you.
And I wanted to indicate it's not described in your paperwork, but in our submitted letter, that we would love to offer the city council an opportunity to be considered as a sponsor of Pride Fest. I don't know if that affects the way the money is budgeted, which may assuage your concerns about the parking. But it would be an opportunity to make a statement that only costs you $200. So not bad.
Thanks, Katie. I'm sorry, it was Katie, right?
It is Katie.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else? All right, we'll close public comment,
I'll move option 2.
which is,
Oh, to approve the requests, including the waiver of fees for vending and all parking.
is there a second?
I'll second.
So I have a question. So it's important that we treat all similar applicants in a consistent manner. Steve, do you feel like we're doing that with option 2?
Not the way it's worded, but the way it's requested, I'd feel more comfortable. We sponsor a lot of events, and therefore you can make a decision to
I would accept the
that
offer
would
of
not
sponsorship.
that would not
in
set
my
a
motion.
precedent. I don't think we live with. This is one
I think
that
the city manager can make it on.
Yeah, so what I had in mind for the sponsorship would be we would reimburse the parking fund from council contingency, just the, $300.
Okay.
I could include that in
Can
my
you-
motion if
can you rescind your motion?
Yeah, I'll rescind
And
my
let's get it cleaned up, okay? Make it easier for Grace, because,
Sure.
right?
You want to do it?
Yeah, I would move option 2 that we approve the request for Ames Pride Fest on Saturday, September 30th, as outlined above, including the waiver of fees for vending and all parking, and reimburse the lost revenue with council contingency.
373,000 or the different.
100.
Ooh,
373,000. Yeah.
Steve, you're
Just
generous.
100. but yeah.
I haven't checked with our financial brain trust, but I think the $373 is what you're talking about from the council contingency fund
I'll second.
for sponsorship.
All right. Moved and seconded by Rachel and then Bronwyn. Any further discussion?
I usually am never in
That makes
favor
sense, yeah.
of supporting parking. I believe that in order to make a less automobile centric society, right, we need to make parking as much of a pain in the neck as we can. But I will say that I think that it's a very important event to support, especially given the state and national climate for LGBTQ plus issues. So I do think it's important that the city take a stand and support this event and really show our appreciation for the work that Ames Pride is doing. So,
Roll call.
aye.
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 Okay, motion passed. All right. Let's go ahead and take a short 5-minute break and reconvene at 8:05. All right, we're back on session. We'll move on to item number 27 regarding a change order for the Stephen L. Shanker Plaza. Good evening.
Good evening, council. So change order number 5, just a brief history. Change order number 1 was the value engineering when we approved the project. So you'll see that was the large negative number. That was value engineering. Change orders 2 through 4 were approved administratively per our purchasing policies. This change order puts us over that threshold, so we're back before council. There is some uniqueness to this one, so we wanted to discuss it a little further. So the change order total, as you can see, is around $37,000. Consists of 3 items. 2 smaller items were increasing the water line size for the ice resurfacer. Just after discussion, we realized we needed a larger line to fill the resurfacer that will be used to maintain the ice in a more prompt fashion. The second was to do some full curb and gutter work on Clark Avenue where the existing driveway was located. The largest item is for $32,000, and that is for a frost prevention system underneath the ice ribbon. This is a glycol system and piping that makes sure the ground will not kind of get frost all the way up to the ice. This was recommended by the contractor due to the fact that the site has clay soils. This is most likely due to the old school being there. Even around City Hall, around the foundation areas, we have encountered clay before. So it's part of the building practices of that time. So they recommended this. Through this project, Confluence has went to a different ice design firm, and they confirmed that the frost prevention system would be a good idea. Due to the large amount and the fact that the designers should have realized this was needed, we're asking council to approve us to request that Confluence repay this amount. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on this. And Keith's also here.
Questions?
So what if we would have known this in the beginning of the process? How would we be in a different place?
We wouldn't have to go through the change order process. It's hard to say how that would have impacted the cost, knowing beforehand. We did get confirmation that the cost was reasonable, but there's a chance that that would have been built into the project. But where we're at in the project, it's hard to know.
Well, what he's saying, during competitive bids, that might have been absorbed and might not have cost us $32,000 because of competitive bids. You know what I'm saying? So,
So we really don't know for sure if we were to do this all over again and we'd had this built into the design, if our price may be the same, it might have been different.
Could have been less.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful.
Corey, can you just confirm for me that when I am looking at the table 1 funding and expenses, that the $37,285 change order is over and above the remaining contingency amount of $88,641?
Yes, I did subtract that change order 5 and just labeled it pending. So you can see what happens if we do approve it, that we go down to that 89,000-ish left in our contingency.
Corey, I'm sorry, one more question. So we deal with these change orders so frequently. This is sort of a unique one. If this was for something that there's no way they could have known about, and sometimes it happens in a construction project, you get into something and all of a sudden you learn something you didn't know. That's sort of a part of the cost of doing any construction project. That's why we have a contingency for the unknowns. And what you're saying to us is that this situation is not in that category of things that weren't knowable. This is something that should have been known and therefore included in our bidding process. Am I restating that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Because I would say if you look through change orders 2 through 4, and even the smaller ones on 5, we're not asking for those. Those were kind of things that came up through construction process. This one, even the subcontractor for Henkel doing the ice used the soil borings to make this recommendation, which we had for the designers of the project.
That's helpful, because I don't remember us having a change order quite like this before my time at council. There's always been sort of, okay, we didn't know that was coming, and so we have to throw that in. But this is sort of different. Thanks.
I believe we've had a few instances like this, but not often. Usually it's construction related, like you're talking.
Thanks.
Yeah, one of the things that concerns me is that if they hadn't changed the ice consultant, we could have had a mess on our hands in terms of potential frost.
I hadn't thought about that.